Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about the United States of America. The first country we're going to be looking at, reminder, the United States of America is not actually on the AP test, but you need to learn US government, a little bit of US history, a little bit about US society to kind of be able to compare the other countries to the United States. Now, demography wise, the United States is a multiracial country. It is 59% white, um, European Caucasian. That number is going down. It's almost 20% Hispanic, 13% Black, 6% Asian, 2.5% mixed race, and 1% Native. The largest and quickest growing population in the United States is Asian, which is a combination of Indian and East Asian. And there has been a massive increase in the census, which is when they count every 10 years, they count the number of people in the United States. Massive increase in people that are biracial in the United States between 2010 and 2020. So culturally, we're becoming more multiracial as the years go on. The United States over time, this is 2000, 2010, 2020. Notice basically the top becomes bigger, and so you have this larger population at the top of the spectrum. That means the older population is growing. And then here at the bottom over time, you notice this that people are having less children. The number of younger people is actually falling. So the United States is suffering from falling demographics in terms of population. This is not great because you have a smaller tax base here that needs to take care of the larger group of people that is up here. Because remember that old people take more money to deal with than younger people overall. So you need to have the younger people. Uh, you want this to be more even because it allows for a greater tax base to help out people that are older. So as a country, we are kind of an older country with a declining birth rate. So a little bit about the history of the country. The country's history really is about two things, and that is money and religion. And you have the establishment of two different colonies in what eventually will become the United States. The first one is the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which is established. You hear about the Pilgrims and the Mayflower. That colony was very puritanical. There was a very Calvinistic work ethic and commitment to religion, but it was also a very egalitarian and educational society where people debated, they discussed, there were town halls. Um, there was a lot of idealism that there would be the development of a utopian society, and that's what like eventually um, the Massachusetts Bay colonies were created out of this idea that we could always have a better, greater society. And then on the southern end, you have the Chesapeake Bay colonies. This is mainly Virginia, Jamestown. Much different type of society. It was very much geared around the making of money. It came out of the rich nobles from Great Britain, so you had a much more aristocratic and paternalistic nature. This is where class-based issues, so when you got indentured servitude and slavery, this really came out of that mayoral system of Great Britain, much more geared towards tradition, that people had a place in society, and wealthy, well-off people and white people were kind of like chosen by God to take care of the less civilized people. It was the combination of these two that eventually create the 13 colonies and eventually the establishes the United States of America. The United States of America is, in fact, the great democratic experiment. It was established by people with the foundational knowledge that a democracy was actually better than any kind of dictatorship or aristocracy, and it's been working towards that ever since. You may ask, well, wait a minute, if it's the great democratic experiment, why do you have slavery? Because at the time of slavery, pretty much every empire on the face of the planet was engaged in some kind of slavery. Remember that over 4 to 5 million slaves went across from Africa to the Americas. About 400,000 of them went to the coasts of North America, and there were millions that went to South America and, of course, the Caribbean overall. So slavery was not unusual. What was unusual is that you actually had a, a document that said all men were created equal and that slavery maintained for up until the Civil War, of course, where you had the country actually break apart and fight a war over the maintenance of the Union. And it was over, of course, that idea that you can't have a free and fair society and still enslave its people. Of course, that turned into segregation, which becomes another blight and another issue that we'll talk about in later sections. The Declaration of Independence in 1776 established the United States of America, committing that the government was supposed to be one created, you know, the power to the people, that everybody is equal, that you are guaranteed life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Basically, your life, your freedom, and you have opportunity. It was the first country on earth really to establish the idea that the people were going to decide for themselves. Now, this takes enormous amounts of time. It does not start as like everybody is equal, but it is by far the most democratic society on planet Earth in 1776, and it really isn't close at all. And it was designed to evolve as a system. For instance, we have the right to vote, otherwise known as suffrage. At first, of course, you had to be a rich, white, Christian landowner. And eventually, those qualifications started to get eliminated. First, religion, then property. Then, of course, with the 15th Amendment, you had race, then you had gender, then you had the indigenous native people of the country. Then you had DC residents that are represented in the Electoral College. You eliminated poll taxes and literacy tests, and of course, 18 years and up. So this is an example of gradually over time, you're seeing a country that is freer and freer and freer and freer and more representative of the people. That is the great democratic experiment. The original government of the United States was a confederation where the regional powers, the regional governments had more power than the central government. This, of course, meant the states in the original Constitution, called the Articles of Confederation, actually had more power than the United States government, and it was very, very ineffective. And what this led to in 1789 was the creation of the Constitution of the United States. The Declaration forms the United States. The Constitution of the United States forms what's going to be the government. Now, the Constitution probably is one of the greatest legal documents on the face of the planet and creates some things that had never been seen up to that point in the world. Number one is that the people that actually run the government are the people, and it literally says it at the top of the document: we the people of the United States. And no other founding document really said that this is a government for, of, and by the people. The Constitution of the United States literally says that we are a democratic government, and we are the ones that hold our own destiny in our hands. Number two, there was a creation of a presidential system of government where the voters actually elect two different branches of government: the ones that make the laws and the ones that enforce the laws. And then from there, the executive nominates a judge, the legislative branch approves the judge. So you have separation of powers here. That means that no branch of government can get too powerful and overrun the government. Super important, the idea of separation of powers, and of course, later on, checks and balances to make sure that no part of government gets too power. Are there parts of government that are a little more powerful depending on the era in US history? Sure, there is. In fact, right now, the executive branch is probably a little more powerful than all the other branches of government. But the idea that the voters can influence so much what happens in these two branches of government and that those powers are separated is a big deal, as is issue number three, which is the judicial branch is separate. It's independent from the other branches of government, which means that the judges can focus only on what the law of the Constitution says and interpret that. They're not worried about getting elected. They're not worried about getting punished by the chief executive. They act independently, which is a sign of a very strong democracy when your judicial branch, your judges, have that ability to work independently. Number four is federalism, a type of government where the regions, instead of a confederate government, the regions, in this case, the states, and the central government, the United States government, actually share power. All right. One is a little more powerful than the other, but states, the regions, can actually make their own laws that the US government can't necessarily override. And the US government still has some power to do things like maintain an army and have a common currency and enact global trade, that kind of thing. So, federalism, a federal style government, really comes out of the Constitution, something that hadn't really been seen before in the world. A Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights is the first time you see it in any document, and it is the part of the Constitution that says, look, we're going to make these 10 amendments to the Constitution, and what they're going to say is that the people actually are being protected from its own government, that these rights cannot be taken away from the government. And it was absolutely amazing that you have this part of the founding document of the government of the United States that says that the government, like people are born. When you have rights, that means that you are born with freedom of speech, right to bear arms, right not to quarter soldiers, or free from unreasonable search and seizure, right to a trial, right against cruel and unusual punishment. All these things were in the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, otherwise known as the Bill of Rights, and that had never, ever been seen before. That's a part of the founding government document that protects the citizens, not from each other, not from anybody but the government that is of the people. Okay. So these are the pillars of US democratic governance. One, the government is held accountable by the people. Number two, you have a presidential system where there is separation of power. Number three, you have an independent judiciary that's accountable to the law, not like a leader. You have a federal system where power is shared with the regions. And finally, you have the Bill of Rights, which protects civil liberties, the actual fundamental rights of the people from the government of the United States.